Life is But a Dream by Avenged Sevenfold. This is the legendary American outfit's 8th studio album, released the 2nd of June via Warner Records. Life is But a Dream consists of 11 tracks, clocks in at around 53 minutes, and is the long-awaited follow-up to 2016's The Stage LP. And full transparency at the top, man, I didn't realize it had been so long without an Avenged Sevenfold album.
Yeah, you know, this is another case, and let's just fucking gloss over really quickly here. I think we have a COVID,
Sure, right.
period here where it's like 3 years passed, but in reality it was like 1 year. So it's like we would have probably gotten this a lot sooner had that not been the case. This it's tough to know where to start with this. I guess first things first, I was very caught off guard by the runtime on this based on the fact that the singles were like fucking 6 minutes a piece. Yeah. Like I thought we were in for like a periphery level, like hour and 15-minute album here. So when I saw this was under an hour, I was like, long, but reasonable.
Yeah, this is the sort of album where you get 2 singles with a runtime like that, and suddenly your eyes sort of dart over to the closing track, and you're like, what are we thinking? 12 minutes, 13-minute long closer, just this massive, insane runtime of a track.
Right.
And it's not there. I mean, it ends on a 4-minute and 30-second instrumental.
It almost loses
instrumental.
It almost loses steam in that sense. You know what I mean? It's like it almost lost interest in itself towards the back half of this album. I think there were a lot of moments where I kind of lost interest in this album. So per Avenged Sevenfold, Life is But a Dream is a journey through an existential crisis, a very personal exploration into the meaning, purpose, and value of human existence, with the anxiety of death always looming. I think this band really went out of their way to kind of make sure people knew where they were coming from with this album so that the expectations were appropriate. I think like when they dropped the first single, you know, I kind of feel like this band really went out of their way to be like, hey, this is more experimental. We're trying a lot of different stuff. Do not expect like, I guess for what it's worth, the stage was a little experimental, but essentially they're like, do not expect anything traditional from Avenged Sevenfold here. So I feel like they really went out of their way to set expectations, right?
I don't know if from that pull quote that's what I gather.
Not from that pull quote specifically, but okay, I think within discussing this album outside of this very specific thing. Though from what it's worth, I will say that I think that individual pull quote is a decent sell in terms of like piquing interest. Like prior to hearing the album, I'm like, okay, I like when bands go grand scale, big conceptual energy with their releases, right?
Sure, and really that was the only reason I challenged that quote for at least being what we mention, and then talking about like that being the whole sentiment behind the album, because that to me just sounds like an Avenged Sevenfold album, right? But if the way that we're presenting
at least
it,
current day Avenged Sevenfold album,
right, like just a lot of like, you know, the anxiety of death always looming, like something like that to me is like, well, that's what metal bands write about, right? So I head into this and I'm like, it's gonna sound like a metal album.
Now, that being said, I will say that the singles did not at all endear me or excite me to check this record out. I thought they were kind of meandering, didn't really bring what I would call single energy to the table. There wasn't anything in particular that really hooked me. So it was hard for me to really be enthusiastic to check this out outside of curiosity, right?
So how are we feeling about the non-singles then?
I thought that once I finished this album, the singles did actually tell the story of what this record would be overall. They painted an accurate picture of what you could come to expect. Now, there's sort of a lot of ways to come at this. But I think my immediate takeaways from this record is that I felt it was, in spite of its tagline and like mission statement, very directionless. It feels a lot like Patchwork, whereas there are a handful of ideas throughout this album that I think are good and I think come across and maybe communicate the concept well, but it often steps all over itself. I think every moment where this album pulls me in, it's quick to shove me away immediately after. And a lot of this, I hang on M Shadows in particular, whose vocal delivery can go from enjoyable in the way that it's always been to, quite honestly, nails on a chalkboard that I struggled to get through.
Yeah.
Mattel is a perfect example of this, where there are moments of an M Shadows that I'm very familiar with, whose singing voice I enjoy, and then this I'm trying to be kind in how I describe it, but just a style of vocal delivery that I found to be personally insufferable in a way that it was almost cringe-inducing.
It's sort of the opposite of that Used album that we just reviewed, where I think I liked everything, or I think I liked the vocals and the delivery, and then everything else really fell short for me. And then here, I think I really do enjoy a lot of what's happening around the vocals. Like, I think that the production is really impressive. I like the avant-garde metal with a lot of like symphonic elements, and like we've got just all sorts of things that we're trying. Right.
Like I like when we go crazy with the production. I like when there's a fucking wind instrument out of nowhere. I like when there's strings. I
like the stops and the starts and all these different things.
Right.
And then
I just don't think it's well, like it's not integrated in a way that is enjoyable to listen to. Like I come at this from a very like I look at this versus artist intent versus like consumer interpretation. You know what I mean? It's like, I understand the artist's intent, but as a consumer, I can see that I did not find the artist's intent to be an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much right there with you. I feel like a lot of people aren't going to love this comparison I'm about to make, but I had a really similar time with last year's Viva Las Vengeance by Panic at the Disco. And
oh
to
my
me,
God, that is such a dead-on comparison.
This is the metal version of that album.
Ish. It's a dead-on comparison because I think Viva Las Vengeance actually does not have a singular good thing to take away from it, where I do feel like there are aspects of this album that I did like.
But as far as
I think you can't salvage Viva Las Vengeance. I think there's salvageable aspects of this where I think if you were to have maybe approached it or constructed it differently, you could have made a product that was compelling to me. Viva Las Vengeance it's like you should burn the hard drive and forget it even exists.
So I don't disagree. Like there's absolutely moments on this album that I do enjoy, but the vast majority of it, I do find myself reaching for that hard drive, reaching for that gasoline and that lighter, and being seconds away from burning it before, like you said, you're pulled back in briefly and then pushed away again. And there your hand goes for the lighter again. And it's like,
there's no bag that they can't fumble on here.
right. It's like, it's sort of whiplash at times.
But there are moments where I think to myself, had we stuck with or been interested in following through with individual aspects of this, there could have been a song here I really liked, you know? Closest we get to that is probably Ordinary, which I really like the vocal effects on M. Shadow's voice. And I think that it being almost like the furthest from an Avenged Sevenfold song we could possibly go kind of made it the far and away the most interesting thing on this record.
So I did want to highlight that because, yeah, it's definitely the weirdest I feel like I've ever heard this band sound. It's the least Avenged Sevenfold song on this album by far.
And
so it's just funny that's your take.
And that worked to its benefit, right? There are so many moments on this record, though, where I'm passively listening to it and it catches my attention because of how bad it is. The slam poetry delivery in We Love You is unbearable. So a lot of the lyrics across the board, I don't think do a good job.
Faster, build taller, build wider. It's so boring.
It's like it commits the sin of like being corny. Like for me, that's a moment that just feels like more than anything else, it shows Avenged Sevenfold's age in a really sad way, where I think this band used to feel like a trailblazer, and now something like this feels like they've been completely left in the dust. Like this feels a lot like five guys who kind of just don't seem like they get it. Yeah, like it feels out of touch in a way. And it's like, and this is what I meant earlier about like artist intent versus consumer. It's like, part of it's like, in a way, it's like Avenged Sevenfold have done such a good job of like doing the rounds of press to make sure that, you know, they weren't trying to make anything that you actually wanted to listen to. Right. So it's like, okay, mission accomplished, right? Like you made a consumer product that really is not consumer friendly. Like I had zero interest in like circling back and diving into this. But there are ways that I think like this album doesn't even live up to what Avenged Sevenfold thinks they made. And I'll circle back to the lyrics early and often, because that does really feel like we most consistently drop the ball, where the grand scale of our ideas are not met by the writing skills of the individuals who put this album together.
Sam, like, to be frank, this is one of the better examples so far this year where you look at a band and you just ask yourself, what were they like? Who let them cook? What did they think they were cooking?
Yeah.
And to your point, like, this band is playing down to their abilities in a way that's not in the sense that, like, you're right. Like, they did a lot of good damage control, saying like, hey, this isn't going to be what you expect it to sound like based on who we are and what we've released in the past. But in the same breath, like, we come out and drop a bad album, essentially. Like, it's, I don't know who this is for besides the band, which is where I get, that's why I compare this to Aviva Las Vengeance last year.
Right, because like, Brendan came out and he's like, this is the album I wanted to make. Like, it's theater, like it's rock opera, exactly. It's all these things. And then it just ends up being, like, it just falls so entirely flat that it's like, maybe it met
throw out
your
the whole kitchen.
Personal expectations, but it certainly did not at all reach mine.
Yeah. I think that this bat was not serving country, Sam.
Very well done.
Yeah, I was super disappointed with this album.
How long you been sitting on that, just waiting to say it?
Just a little while. I almost forgot, which is why I wanted to sneak it in. But no, like I just, full transparency, I didn't have a good time with this album. I didn't really expect to, like, I had expectations for it, but I also didn't expect to like it. But part of me was like, maybe, just maybe I do. And that certainly didn't happen. I've never been a huge Avenged Sevenfold fan anyway, but like, no one can't admit that the old shit's insane. And
I think that in a lot of ways, something like City of Evil is a grand opera, big conceptual album. And it's not just some fun metalcore songs. So in my mind, Avenged Sevenfold is capable of these things.
They've done it. They've proven they have.
I also think the stage was probably a slightly better version of this record as well, where it did have a lot of like big picture ideas and nailed them more often or at all in a way that this album doesn't. But I will say that I don't think this is completely without merit, because there are aspects of it that like, there are moments where I like M Shadows. There are some riffs on here I can kind of get behind, right?
And I think that we are surprisingly, honestly, a minority here, because it feels like critics and fans alike are receiving this album really well.
Yeah, you know, I think that the press rounds worked on some other people in ways they didn't work for me, where some people said, okay, I understand the vision and I'm open to it. And this album kind of does work for me. It just didn't work for me at all. Like this doesn't really, for any length of time long enough for me to really like ingrain myself in it, like ever win over my attention. This is gonna feel harsh, but this is
an easy 1 star for me.
I was gonna go 1.5. I think that the hardest part about this is that at best, I like a song. At worst, I like a few moments, but there might be 5 total minutes of this 53-minute album that I think is kind of neat, but never really fleshed out enough to win me over. So it's for my sensibilities nearly impossible to recommend this to people.
Yeah, I will never revisit this album. It's not because I outright hate it. It's just I can't acknowledge enough that this one's not for me by any means. Just like Viva Las Vengeance last year, I'm never going to spend any more time with this one.
Yeah.